When a wealthy CEO decided to work undercover in her own company, she never expected to discover a secret that would shatter everything she believed about her past. One evening, disguised as a waitress, she spotted her janitor having dinner with his 7-year-old daughter, but no one imagined what would come next. If you're enjoying this incredible story of hidden truths and unexpected connections, please hit the like button and let me know in the comments what you think will happen next. Your support means everything to this channel. Victoria Sterling adjusted her cheap polyester uniform one more time, her manicured nails feeling foreign against the rough fabric. At 34, she had built Sterling Enterprises from nothing, turning it into a billion-dollar empire. But tonight, she wasn't the feared CEO who commanded boardrooms across Manhattan. Tonight, she was just Vicky, a part-time waitress at Murphy's Diner, the small family restaurant 3 blocks from her corporate headquarters. The idea had struck her during a particularly brutal board meeting 2 weeks ago. Her executives were discussing employee satisfaction surveys, spouting numbers that felt disconnected from reality. How can we truly understand our workforce, she had wondered, when we're so removed from their daily lives? The answer came to her in a moment of inspiration that bordered on madness. She would go undercover in her own company. She had spent days preparing. Hair dyed a mousy brown, contact lenses to hide her distinctive green eyes, and a complete wardrobe of thrift store finds. She'd even practiced walking differently, slouching her shoulders to hide the confident posture that had become her trademark. The transformation was so complete that even her own mother wouldn't recognize her. The diner buzzed with the usual evening crowd, construction workers grabbing coffee, young families sharing modest meals, elderly couples who had been coming here for decades. Victoria had been working here for 3 nights now, carefully observing her employees during their off hours. Most came here because the portions were generous and the prices fair, a stark contrast to the upscale establishments where she usually dined. "Table 7 needs their check," called out Martha, the head waitress who had taken Victoria under her wing. At 62, Martha moved with the efficient grace of someone who had spent her entire adult life serving others. She had been kind to the new girl, sharing tips about difficult customers and the best ways to maximize tips. Victoria grabbed the receipt pad and headed toward table 7, but stopped short when she recognized the customer. David Chen, her night janitor, sat across from a small girl with pigtails, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the diner's overhead lights. Victoria had seen David countless times during her late nights at the office, quietly cleaning around her while she worked. He was always polite, nodding respectfully when they crossed paths, but they had never exchanged more than basic pleasantries. The little girl couldn't have been older than 7, her dark hair cascading in perfect waves around her cherubic face. She wore a simple pink dress that had clearly been washed many times, and her shoes were scuffed but clean. Despite the modest clothing, there was something almost regal about the way she carried herself, a natural poise that seemed far beyond her years. "Daddy, can we get dessert?" the girl asked, her voice carrying a slight lisp that made her words endearing rather than unclear. David's face showed the internal struggle every parent knows. The desire to give his child everything weighed against practical limitations. "Maybe next time, sweetheart. We need to be careful with our money, remember?" The girl nodded solemnly, but Victoria could see the disappointment flicker across her features. It was a look she recognized all too well from her own childhood, when her father had struggled to make ends meet after her mother's illness drained their savings. "But Daddy," the girl continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "the pretty lady over there has been watching us. She looks really sad. Maybe she needs a friend." Victoria's blood turned to ice. The child was looking directly at her with eyes that seemed far too knowing for someone so young. There was something unsettling about the way the girl studied her, as if she could see through the disguise, through the layers of deception, straight to her soul. David turned to follow his daughter's gaze, and his eyes met Victoria's. She saw recognition flicker across his features for just a moment before he looked away, but something in his expression suggested he knew exactly who she was. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her carefully constructed disguise might not be as perfect as she had believed. "Lily, don't stare at people," David said gently, but his voice carried an undertone of tension that hadn't been there moments before. "It's not polite." Lily. The name struck Victoria like lightning. She found herself moving closer to the table, drawn by an inexplicable pull she couldn't understand or resist. The child's features, the way she held her head, something about her mannerisms, it all felt hauntingly familiar. "Is everything okay here?" Victoria asked, her voice barely steady. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Lily had the same high cheekbones that Victoria saw in the mirror every morning, the same slightly pointed chin that had been a family trait for generations. "We're fine, thank you," David replied quickly, his hands protectively moving closer to his daughter. But Lily wasn't deterred by her father's caution. "You have pretty eyes," Lily said to Victoria, tilting her head to one side. "They look just like the lady in the picture Daddy keeps in his wallet. Are you her sister?" The words hit Victoria with the force of a tsunami. David's face went white, and his hand instinctively moved to his back pocket. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and impossible implications. Victoria felt the world spinning around her as memories she had tried so hard to bury came flooding back. 7 years ago, she had been a different person, younger, more naive, still believing in love and happy endings. She had been engaged to a man she thought she knew, until she discovered his betrayal just weeks before their wedding. In her pain and fury, she had made decisions that seemed right at the time, but had haunted her ever since. "I think there's been some mistake," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was gathering his things, clearly preparing to leave, but Lily remained seated, her curious gaze moving between the two adults. Victoria's mind raced. The timeline fit. The physical resemblance was unmistakable, but it was impossible. It had to be impossible. She had made sure it was impossible. "Daddy, why do you look scared?" Lily asked, her voice filled with innocent concern. "The lady seems nice, and she really does look like the picture you showed me of—" "That's enough, Lily," David interrupted, standing abruptly. "We need to go home now." But as he reached for his daughter's hand, Lily looked directly at Victoria and said the words that would change everything. "Are you my mommy? Daddy said my mommy was very beautiful and very sad, and that she had to go away to take care of important things. But he said she might come back someday when she was ready to be a family." The diner seemed to fade away around Victoria. The sounds of other conversations, the clatter of dishes, the hum of the coffee machine, everything became distant and muffled. She stared at this impossible child who might be her daughter, at David who might have been lying to her for 7 years, and felt her carefully constructed world begin to crumble. Victoria's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white against the worn formica surface. The fluorescent lights above seemed to grow brighter, casting harsh shadows that made the entire scene feel surreal, like something from a dream she couldn't wake up from. I need some air," she whispered, backing away from the table. David started to move toward her, but she held up her hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't. Not here, not in front of her." Lily watched the exchange with the intensity of a child who understood that something important was happening, even if she couldn't grasp the full significance. Her dark eyes, so much like Victoria's own, moved between the two adults with growing concern. "Did I say something wrong?" Lily asked, her voice small and worried. "I'm sorry if I made you sad, pretty lady. Sometimes Daddy gets sad when we talk about my mommy too." Victoria felt tears threatening to spill over. She had spent 7 years building walls around her heart, convincing herself that she had made the right choice, that she was protecting everyone involved, that some sacrifices were necessary for the greater good. But looking at this beautiful, innocent child, she wondered if she had been lying to herself all along. "No, sweetheart," Victoria managed to say. kneeling down to Lily's eye level, despite David's obvious discomfort. "You didn't say anything wrong. You're perfect exactly as you are." Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. Lily had Victoria's nose, her grandmother's dimples, and the same stubborn curl at the crown of her head that Victoria had fought with every morning of her childhood. But more than the physical features, there was something in the child's demeanor, a quiet confidence, an old soul wisdom that felt achingly familiar. "Lily," David said firmly, "we really need to go now. It's getting late, and you have school tomorrow." But Lily wasn't ready to leave. She reached out and touched Victoria's hand with the fearless trust that only children possess. Her skin was soft and warm, and Victoria felt an electric connection that seemed to confirm what her heart already knew. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Lily asked. "Maybe we could have dessert together. Daddy says ice cream tastes better when you share it with friends." Victoria looked up at David, searching his face for answers to questions she wasn't ready to ask out loud. He looked older than she remembered, worn down by years of single parenthood and financial struggle. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, and his hands showed the calluses of honest labor. But there was also something else in his expression, guilt, perhaps, or regret. "I don't know if I'll be here tomorrow," Victoria said honestly, "but I hope we'll see each other again soon." It was a promise she wasn't sure she could keep, but the words felt necessary. Lily smiled, a radiant expression that lit up her entire face, and Victoria felt something crack open inside her chest, a space she had kept carefully sealed for 7 years. As David helped Lily into her coat, Victoria noticed the careful way he handled their interaction. He was protective, but not possessive, loving, but wary. It was the behavior of a man who had secrets of his own, who was as surprised by this encounter as she was. "Say goodbye, Lily," David said quietly. "Goodbye, pretty lady," Lily said, then added in a stage whisper, "I hope you're not sad anymore." They left money on the table, exact change plus a modest tip, and headed toward the door. Victoria watched them go, memorizing every detail of the way Lily skipped beside her father, the way David's hand rested protectively on her shoulder, the way they moved together with the easy familiarity of two people who had only each other in the world. Just before they reached the exit, Lily turned back and waved. It was such a simple gesture, but it hit Victoria with devastating force. She waved back, and for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to be on the receiving end of that wave every day, to be the person Lily ran to with scraped knees and exciting news, to be part of the bedtime rituals and morning cuddles that made up the fabric of a child's world. After they left, Victoria stood in the middle of the diner, feeling like she was drowning in plain sight. Martha approached with the gentleness of someone who had seen every kind of human crisis play out in her restaurant. "You okay, honey?" Martha asked, her weathered hand resting lightly on Victoria's shoulder. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," Victoria replied, her voice hollow. She looked around the diner, suddenly seeing it through different eyes. This wasn't just a place where her employees came to eat. It was where David brought his daughter for special moments, where he tried to give her normal experiences despite their limited resources. It was where he had probably sat many times, looking at that photograph Lily had mentioned, perhaps wondering about the woman who had walked away from both of them. "The little girl was sweet," Martha continued. "She comes in here sometimes with her dad. He's a good man, works hard, never complains. Always makes sure she gets enough to eat even if he doesn't order much for himself. You can tell he'd do anything for that child." Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had spent years telling herself that she had made the mature decision, the responsible choice. She had convinced herself that David and the baby, and she now knew it had been a baby, despite all her efforts to prevent it, would be better off without her chaos and ambition. She had been building her company, fighting battles on multiple fronts, dealing with hostile takeovers and corporate espionage. Her life had been no place for a child. But looking at Lily tonight, seeing the obvious love and care that David had provided, she wondered if she had been making excuses. Maybe she hadn't been protecting them from her complicated life. Maybe she had been protecting herself from the vulnerability that comes with loving someone more than your own ambitions. "Martha," Victoria said slowly, "how long have they been coming here?" "Oh, years now, since she was tiny, maybe 3 years old when I first saw her. David used to bring her in a high chair and she'd make such a mess." Martha smiled at the memory. "She's grown into such a polite little thing. Always says please and thank you, never makes a fuss when they can't afford dessert." 3 years old. That would have been 4 years ago, which meant David had been bringing Lily here since she was barely more than a toddler. All this time, while Victoria had been building her empire, expanding globally, making decisions that affected thousands of employees, her daughter had been growing up 3 blocks away. Her daughter. The words felt foreign and familiar at the same time. She had never allowed herself to think them before, but now they seemed to echo in her mind with the weight of truth. Victoria finished her shift in a daze, going through the motions of taking orders and clearing tables while her mind spun with possibilities and implications. When Martha finally sent her home, she found herself standing outside the diner in the cool night air, staring up at the city lights and trying to process what had just happened to her life. Her phone buzzed with messages from her assistant about tomorrow's meetings, but she ignored them. For the first time in years, business didn't seem like the most important thing in the world. She had a daughter who was being raised by her former fiancé, who apparently had been telling Lily stories about her mother, stories that painted Victoria as someone who cared enough to come back. The question that haunted her as she walked the empty streets toward her penthouse was simple and terrifying. What was she going to do now? Could she walk back into their lives after 7 years of absence? Did she have the right to disrupt the stable, loving home that David had clearly created for Lily? And most frightening of all, was she capable of being the mother that beautiful little girl deserved? As she reached her building, Victoria looked back in the direction of the diner. Somewhere out there, in a modest apartment she had never seen, her daughter was probably sleeping peacefully, dreaming the innocent dreams of childhood. And for the first time in 7 years, Victoria Sterling, CEO, businesswoman, and master of her own destiny, had absolutely no idea what her next move should be. Victoria didn't sleep that night. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, looking out over the city that she had conquered through sheer determination and ruthless ambition. The lights below stretched endlessly in every direction, representing the empire she had built, the thousands of employees who depended on her decisions, the legacy she had created from nothing. But all she could think about was a 7-year-old girl with pigtails and her father's patient eyes. By dawn, Victoria had made a decision that went against every instinct she had developed as a CEO. Instead of returning to her office to handle the crisis that was undoubtedly waiting for her, she had missed 4 important calls from her board of directors. She found herself back at Sterling Enterprises at 6 in the morning, but not in her executive suite. She was in the basement level, in the janitorial supply room where David would start his shift. She had changed back into her disguise, but this time it felt different. This time, she wasn't playing a role to understand her employees better. She was trying to understand the man who had raised her daughter, who had apparently spoken of her with enough love and respect that Lily had recognized her from a photograph. David arrived at 6:30, just as he had every morning for the past 5 years, according to his employment records. Victoria had spent the early morning hours reviewing his file, learning details about his life that made her chest tight with unexpected emotion. He had never missed a day of work, never been late, never filed a single complaint, despite being passed over for promotions that went to less qualified candidates. His emergency contact was listed as Lily Chen, daughter, with no backup number, suggesting they truly had no one else in the world but each other. He stopped short when he saw her standing near his supply cart, still dressed in her waitress uniform from the night before. "Victoria," he said quietly, and hearing her real name from his lips sent a shock through her system. "I wondered if you would come. You knew it was me, at the restaurant." It wasn't a question, but David nodded anyway. I recognized you the moment you walked up to our table. The disguise is good, but I know your voice. I know the way you move when you're nervous. I've had 7 years to memorize every detail about you." The confession hung between them in the sterile air of the basement. Victoria found herself studying his face, looking for traces of the younger man she had once planned to marry. He was thinner now, more serious, with premature grey threading through his dark hair, but his eyes were the same. Kind, intelligent, patient eyes that had first attracted her when they met at a coffee shop near the university where he was finishing his engineering degree. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David was quiet for a long moment, methodically organizing his cleaning supplies with the precise movements of someone who had performed the same routine countless times. "Tell you what exactly? That you had a daughter you didn't want. That I quit my engineering program to raise her when you made it clear you couldn't handle the responsibility? That every night for 7 years I've tucked her into bed and she's asked me when her mommy was coming home." Each word hit Victoria like a physical blow. She had expected anger, perhaps, or demands for money, or accusations about her abandonment. She hadn't expected this quiet, devastating honesty that left her with no defense and no excuse. "I didn't know," she said finally. I suspected, but I convinced myself I was wrong. I convinced myself that if there had been a baby, you would have told me, that you would have demanded support or acknowledgement or something." "I tried," David said, turning to face her fully. "I called you 17 times in the first month after Lily was born. Your assistant said you were traveling for business. When I finally reached you, you said you were in the middle of a hostile takeover and couldn't talk. You told me not to call again unless someone was dying." The memory came back to her in vivid, horrible detail. She had been in London, fighting to save a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Her phone had been ringing constantly with crisis after crisis, and when David's name appeared on the screen, she had answered impatiently, already mentally rehearsing the conversation she needed to have with her lawyers. She remembered his voice, strained with exhaustion, trying to tell her something important. She remembered cutting him off, telling him she didn't have time for personal drama, that whatever had happened between them was in the past, and she needed to focus on her future. She had hung up before he could explain about Lily. "I thought you were calling to ask for another chance," she said, the admission scraping against her throat like broken glass. "I thought you were going to try to get me back, and I couldn't handle that conversation while everything in my business was falling apart. By the time I realized you didn't know about Lily, months had passed. You were already becoming this untouchable success story. Your company was growing so fast, your face was on magazine covers. I told myself that you had moved on to a bigger life, that you didn't need the complication of a baby you never planned for." Victoria sank onto a metal stool, feeling the weight of 7 years of miscommunication and missed opportunities. "But you kept my picture. You told her about me." For the first time since she'd known him, David's composure cracked slightly. She saw his hand shake as he reached into his wallet and pulled out a worn photograph, her engagement photo, the one they had taken for the newspaper announcement that never ran because she had called off the wedding. "She started asking about her mother when she was 3, he said, staring down at the photo. "I couldn't bring myself to tell her that you had walked away before she was even born. So I told her stories about how smart and beautiful and strong you were. I told her that you were out in the world doing important things, but that you loved her even from far away. You made me sound like a hero when I was actually the villain. You weren't a villain, Victoria. You were 27 years old, scared, and trying to build something meaningful with your life. I understood why you left. I just wished." He trailed off, carefully putting the photograph back in his wallet. "Wished what?" "I wished you had stayed long enough to meet her, to see what we could have built together." The simple statement broke something open inside Victoria's chest. She thought about all the nights she had worked until dawn, all the weekends spent in conference rooms, all the relationships she had sacrificed on the altar of success. She had told herself it was worth it, that she was building something lasting, something that mattered. But looking at David now, Seeing the love and exhaustion and quiet dignity in his face, she wondered if she had been building the wrong kind of legacy entirely. "She's perfect," Victoria said, and meant it completely. "Last night, watching her with you, seeing how happy and confident and kind she is. David, you've done an incredible job raising her. She's everything I would have wanted in a daughter." "She's everything I never knew I wanted in life," David replied. "The day she was born, when the nurse put her in my arms, and she stopped crying the moment she heard my voice, I knew that nothing I had ever done or would ever do would be more important than being her father." Victoria felt tears starting again. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I missed all of it. I'm sorry you had to do everything alone." "I wasn't alone," David said gently. "I had her. And honestly, Victoria, I don't know if we would have made it work back then. We were both so young, both trying to figure out who we were supposed to be. Maybe things happened the way they needed to happen. But now," Victoria asked, the question hanging heavy between them, "what happens now? She thinks I might be her mother, and she wants to have ice cream with me." David was quiet for a long time, and Victoria could see him wrestling with possibilities and fears that mirrored her own. "Now," he said finally, "I think we need to figure out what's best for Lily, not what's easiest for us, not what makes the most sense for your career or my pride, but what's going to make that little girl happy and secure." "And what do you think that is?" "I think," David said slowly, "that she deserves to know her mother if her mother wants to know her. But Victoria, you can't do this halfway. You can't be a part-time parent when it's convenient for your schedule. Lily has already lived 7 years wondering if she was worth coming back for. If you're going to be in her life, you have to be all in." Victoria stood up, pacing the small space as her mind raced. All in. It was a concept that had always applied to her business decisions, but never to her personal life. Could she restructure her entire existence around a 7-year-old girl she barely knew? Could she learn to be a mother when she had spent her adult life avoiding any responsibility that couldn't be delegated to a team of experts? But then she thought about Lily's smile, about the way she had waved goodbye, about the innocent question that had shattered Victoria's carefully constructed world. "Are you my mommy?" "I want to try," Victoria said, the words surprising her with their certainty. "I don't know if I'll be any good at it, and I'll probably make a million mistakes, but David, I want to try to be her mother." David studied her face for a long moment, and Victoria found herself holding her breath, waiting for his verdict on whether she deserved a second chance at the most important opportunity of her life. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said finally. "For Lily's sake, we'll figure out how to be a family." The word family hit Victoria like a revelation. She had been so focused on individual success, on personal achievement, that she had forgotten there were other kinds of legacy worth building. But as she stood in that basement room, with the man who had loved their daughter enough for both of them, she felt something shifting inside her chest, a space opening up for possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. Above them, the business world was waking up, preparing for another day of deals and deadlines and corporate warfare. But down here, in the quiet space between what had been and what might be possible, Victoria Sterling was discovering that the most important merger of her life had nothing to do with companies or profit margins. It had to do with learning how to be someone's mother. 3 days later, Victoria found herself standing outside Jefferson Elementary School at 3:15 in the afternoon, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had spent 72 hours researching everything she could about 7-year-old development, children's psychology, and what it meant to be a good parent. Her penthouse now looked like an academic library had exploded, with books scattered across every surface. What to expect from your school-age child, the art of listening to children, building trust with kids after trauma. She had also spent those 3 days having the most difficult conversations of her professional life. Her assistant, Margaret, had been stunned when Victoria announced she would be scaling back her direct involvement in day-to-day operations. Her board of directors had been less understanding when she explained that she needed to restructure her schedule indefinitely for urgent family matters. "Then Two major deals had been postponed, and her stock price had taken a minor hit when word leaked that the notoriously work-obsessed CEO was suddenly unavailable for meetings. But none of that mattered now, as she watched the school doors burst open and children pour out like colorful confetti. She spotted Lily immediately. The little girl's distinctive pigtails and bright yellow backpack made her unmistakable in the crowd. David walked beside her, holding her small hand as they navigated through the chaos of pickup time. Victoria had texted David that morning, asking if she could meet them after school. His response had been cautious but hopeful. "Lily's been asking about the nice lady from the restaurant every day. Maybe it's time." Now, seeing them together in the bright afternoon sunlight, Victoria felt a familiar surge of panic. What if she said the wrong thing? What if Lily didn't like her once she got to know her? What if David had changed his mind about letting her into their lives? "Pretty lady," Lily's voice cut through Victoria's anxiety like sunshine through clouds. The little girl had spotted her and was tugging on David's hand, pointing in her direction with unbridled excitement. David looked up and caught Victoria's eye. He said something to Lily, who nodded eagerly, and then they were walking toward her. Victoria had the absurd impulse to run, but her feet felt rooted to the sidewalk. "Hi," she said when they reached her, the word coming out smaller than she had intended. "Hi," Lily replied, beaming up at her with a smile that could have powered the entire city. "Daddy said you wanted to meet us here. Are we going to get ice cream now?" Victoria laughed despite her nerves. "If that's okay with your dad, then yes, we can get ice cream." David nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "There's a place called Scoops, about 2 blocks from here. Lily's been there exactly 3 times in her life, so it's still a very special treat." The comment wasn't accusatory, but it reminded Victoria of the financial realities that had shaped Lily's childhood. While Victoria had been buying companies and expanding globally, her daughter had been living in a world where ice cream was a rare luxury rather than a casual indulgence. They walked together toward Scoops, an old-fashioned parlor with checkered floors and red vinyl booths that looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. Lily skipped between them, chattering about her day at school, her upcoming spelling test, and her best friend Emma, who had loose tooth. "And Mrs. Patterson said that my drawing of our family was really good," Lily continued, digging through her backpack as they walked. "She said I have natural artistic ability. Do you want to see it?" Before either adult could respond, Lily had pulled out a piece of construction paper covered in crayon marks. Victoria's breath caught in her throat when she saw it. There were 3 stick figures labeled in careful 7-year-old handwriting: "Me, Daddy, and Mommy." Ndum, the mommy figure had long yellow hair and was standing slightly apart from the other 2, with what looked like a briefcase in one hand and the other hand reaching toward the child. "I drew Mommy the way Daddy described her," Lily explained matter-of-factly. "He said she has beautiful long hair and that she's very important and smart. And see, I drew her reaching for me because Daddy said that even though she's far away, she's always thinking about me." Victoria felt tears burning behind her eyes. She looked at David, who was staring determinedly at the sidewalk, his jaw clenched with emotion. This was what he had done for 7 years, painted her as a loving mother who was simply absent, not as a woman who had walked away before her daughter was even born. "It's beautiful," Victoria managed to say. "You're a wonderful artist." "Daddy hung it on our refrigerator next to my spelling tests and my good behavior certificate from school," Lily said proudly. "Our refrigerator is covered with my stuff. Daddy says it's like having an art gallery right in our kitchen." They reached Scoops, and Lily pressed her face against the display case, her eyes wide at the rainbow of flavors. Victoria watched her daughter's expression, memorizing every detail, the way her eyes lit up at the sight of chocolate chip cookie dough, the serious consideration she gave to each option, the polite way she asked David if she could have 2 scoops. "You can have whatever you want, sweetheart," Victoria said before David could respond, then immediately regretted the interference. She saw David's face tighten and realized she had just made her first parenting mistake. undermining his authority and disrupting the careful boundaries he had established. Actually, David said gently but firmly, Lily knows our family rule about special treats. One scoop, any flavor you want. Lily nodded without complaint, already used to structure and limits that Victoria was only beginning to understand. "I'll have strawberry, please," she told the teenage clerk behind the counter. They found a booth near the window, and Victoria found herself studying her daughter with the intensity of someone trying to memorize a masterpiece. Lily ate her ice cream with careful precision, making sure not to drip any on her school clothes. Her table manners were impeccable, her conversation thoughtful and engaging. David had clearly raised her with love, patience, and consistent expectations. "So," Lily said suddenly, looking directly at Victoria with those unnervingly perceptive eyes, "are you really my mummy, or do you just look like her?" The direct question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria glanced at David, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. Permission to be honest, or perhaps recognition that the moment of truth had arrived, whether they were ready for it or not. "I think I might be," Victoria said carefully. "But being someone's mommy is about more than just biology. It's about being there for bedtime stories and scraped knees and school plays and all the little moments that make up a life. And I haven't been there for any of those things." Lily considered this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. "But you could start being there now, right? Daddy always says it's never too late to start doing the right thing." The wisdom of children, Victoria thought, could be devastating in its simplicity. "I would like that very much," she said. "But it would have to be okay with your daddy, and it would have to be okay with you." "It's okay with me," Lily said immediately. "I've wanted a mommy for my whole life. Emma has a mommy who braids her hair and helps her with homework and comes to all the school concerts. I always wondered what it would feel like to have someone like that." Victoria felt something breaking apart inside her chest. All the walls she had built, all the reasons she had given herself for staying away, all the fear that had kept her running from the most important relationship of her life. "Lily," David said gently, "remember what we talked about. Sometimes grown-ups need time to figure out complicated things. We can't rush Victoria into making promises she might not be ready to keep." But Victoria was looking at her daughter, really looking at her, and seeing not just the child she had abandoned, but the person Lily was becoming. Smart, kind, resilient, hopeful, despite every reason to be otherwise. 7 years old and already more emotionally mature than Victoria had been at 27. "I'm ready," Victoria said, the words surprising her with their certainty. "I mean, I don't know how to be a mother and I'll probably make mistakes, but I'm ready to learn. If you'll teach me." Lily's face lit up like Christmas morning. "I can teach you everything, like how I like my sandwiches cut diagonally, and that I'm scared of thunderstorms but not regular rain, and that my favorite bedtime story is the one about the little prince who lives on an asteroid." "The Little Prince," Victoria said, and Lily nodded eagerly. "Daddy reads it to me at least once a month. He does all the voices, even the grown-ups who don't understand anything important." Victoria found herself smiling, a real smile that felt like it came from somewhere deep inside her that she had forgotten existed. "I'd love to hear that story sometime." "You could come over for dinner," Lily said, bouncing slightly in her seat with excitement. "Daddy makes the best spaghetti and meatballs in the whole world. And after dinner, we could read stories, and you could see my room and meet my stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts." David cleared his throat softly. "Lily, maybe we should take things a little slower. Victoria has a very busy job and—" "Actually," Victoria interrupted, "dinner sounds perfect. What night would work best for you?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither adult was quite ready to examine. They were talking about more than a meal. They were talking about Victoria stepping into the domestic sphere she had spent her entire adult life avoiding. About David opening his carefully protected world to the woman who had already broken his heart once. About Lily getting her hopes up for a family that might not be sustainable. "Friday," David suggested finally. "That way, if things go, well, if things are good, Lily won't have to worry about school the next day." Friday it is, Victoria said, and felt like she was signing the most important contract of her life. As they walked back toward the school where David's old Toyota was parked, Lily chattered about all the things she wanted to show Victoria, all the stories she wanted to tell her, all the questions she had been saving up for years. Victoria found herself making mental notes, trying to catalogue every detail so she wouldn't forget a single thing her daughter thought was important. When they reached the car, Lily turned and hugged Victoria without warning, a fierce, trusting embrace that smelled like strawberry ice cream and childhood shampoo. Victoria felt tears threatening again as she hugged her daughter back, marveling at how perfectly Lily fit in her arms, as if some part of her body had been designed specifically for this moment. "I'm really glad you came back, Mommy," Lily whispered against Victoria's shoulder. And for the first time in 7 years, Victoria Sterling, master of the corporate universe, conqueror of impossible deals, felt like she might finally be exactly where she belonged. Friday evening found Victoria standing outside a modest apartment building in Queens, holding a bouquet of daisies and fighting the urge to flee back to Manhattan. She had changed her outfit 4 times, finally settling on dark jeans and a simple sweater, clothes that cost more than David probably made in a month, but at least looked approachable rather than intimidating. The building was older but well-maintained, with small gardens planted by residents who cared about their community. Victoria climbed to the 3rd floor, following the faint sound of laughter and the rich aroma of garlic and tomato sauce that grew stronger as she approached apartment 3B. She knocked softly, and within seconds the door flew open to reveal Lily, who had clearly been waiting by the window. "Mommy, you came!" Lily launched herself at Victoria's waist, hugging her with uninhibited joy. "I've been helping Daddy cook all afternoon, and I set the table with our fancy plates. Well, they're not really fancy, but they're our best ones, and I drew you a welcome card." Victoria felt her heart expand in her chest as she hugged Lily back. "These are for you," she said, presenting the daisies. "I wasn't sure what your favorite flowers were." "I love daisies. They're happy flowers," Lily said, accepting the bouquet like it was made of gold. "Daddy, come see the pretty flowers Mommy brought." David appeared from the kitchen, wearing an apron that read "Kiss the Cook," a gift from Lily, Victoria suspected, given the childish handwriting of the decoration around the edges. He looked nervous, but genuinely pleased to see her. "Welcome to our home," he said simply, and something in his tone made Victoria understand that this was sacred ground, the space where he had built a life for their daughter, where every corner held memories she had missed. The apartment was small, but filled with light and love. The living room doubled as Lily's art studio, with her drawings taped to the walls and her school projects displayed with museum-level care. The kitchen was tiny but efficient, with a table for 2 that had been set for 3, requiring some creative arrangement of chairs borrowed from neighbors. "Give me the tour, sweetheart," Victoria said to Lily, who grabbed her hand eagerly. "This is where Daddy and I watch movies on Friday nights," Lily said, pointing to the couch that had clearly been repaired multiple times but was covered with soft blankets and throw pillows. "And this is my reading corner where I do my homework, and that's our bookshelf. Daddy says books are the most important thing to spend money on after food and rent." Victoria examined the bookshelf, which was indeed impressive for a family living on a janitor's salary. Children's classics mixed with picture books, educational workbooks alongside fairy tales. Many were clearly second-hand, but all were well cared for, with little bookmarks and notes in Lily's careful handwriting. "And this," Lily said, pulling Victoria toward a small alcove, "is my room." The space was barely large enough for a twin bed and a small dresser, but every inch had been maximized with love and creativity. The walls were painted a soft lavender, and glow-in-the-dark stars covered the ceiling in accurate constellation patterns. A bulletin board displayed certificates from school, photos of Lily with David, and drawings that chronicled her growth from toddler scribbles to increasingly sophisticated artwork. "Daddy painted the stars himself," Lily said proudly. He looked up the real constellations so I could learn them and see my memory box. She pointed to a decorated shoebox on her dresser covered with stickers and glitter. That's where I keep all my special things. Want to see? Before Victoria could respond, Lily had opened the box and was carefully removing its contents. There were ticket stubs from the one time they had gone to the circus, a pressed flower from a park picnic, a photo booth strip of silly faces, and several small toys that had clearly been treasured beyond their monetary value. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was the photograph David had shown her, the engagement photo she had forgotten existed. But this copy was different. Someone had carefully colored it with crayons, adding a tiny figure between the two adults, a little girl with pigtails, holding both their hands. I drew myself into the picture, Lily explained matter-of-factly. Daddy said it was okay to imagine what it would have been like if we were all together from the beginning. Victoria's vision blurred as she stared at the modified photograph. This was how Lily had been imagining her family, not as it was, but as it could have been. The innocence and hope represented in those careful crayon strokes hit Victoria harder than any corporate crisis ever had. "It's beautiful," Victoria managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "Dinner's ready," David called from the kitchen, giving Victoria a moment to compose herself. They gathered around the small table, and Victoria was touched by the obvious effort that had gone into the meal. The spaghetti and meatballs were indeed delicious, made with care and served with genuine pride. Lily chattered throughout dinner, telling stories about school, asking Victoria about her work and sharing jokes that made them all laugh. "Daddy," Lily said as they finished the main course, "can we show Mommy the photo albums now?" David hesitated, glancing at Victoria. "Maybe after dessert, sweetheart. Let's not overwhelm our guest." But Victoria was curious now. "Photo albums." "I documented everything," David said quietly. "Every milestone, every holiday, every ordinary moment that seemed special. I thought maybe someday you might want to see what you had missed." The albums were kept in a cabinet in the living room, 3 thick books chronicling 7 years of Lily's life. Victoria's hands shook as she opened the first one, labeled in David's careful handwriting, "Lily Rose Chen, Year 1. The first photo nearly destroyed her. It showed David in a hospital bed, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny red-faced baby against his chest. The next page showed Lily's first days at home, sleeping in a crib that David had obviously assembled himself, taking a bottle, lying on a blanket covered with toys that must have stretched his budget to the limit. "I was so scared," David said softly, turning the pages with reverence. "I had never held a baby before she was born. I didn't know anything about feeding schedules or sleep patterns or any of it, but she was so small and perfect, and she needed me, so I figured it out." Page after page documented milestones Victoria had missed. Lily's first smile, her first tooth, her first word, which was dada, and Victoria felt a pang of regret that would probably never fully heal. There were photos of first steps, first solid foods, first Christmas morning with presents carefully wrapped despite their obvious financial limitations. "She was walking by 10 months, David said with pride. "And talking early too, full sentences by 18 months. She's always been exceptional." Victoria turned to the second album, Years 2 and 3, and saw her daughter growing from a toddler into a little girl. There were birthday parties with neighborhood children, trips to the zoo and free museums, bedtime stories read with theatrical flair. In every photo, David looked tired but happy, and Lily looked loved and secure. The third album brought them to recent years, and Victoria could see herself in Lily more clearly now. The intelligent eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw when she was concentrating, the graceful way she moved even as a child. But more than physical resemblance, Victoria could see personality traits emerging, curiosity, determination, a natural leadership quality that showed up in photos of Lily organizing other children in playground games. "She's incredible," Victoria said, closing the last album carefully. "David, she's absolutely incredible, and that's entirely because of you." She asks about you, David said quietly, while Lily was in the kitchen getting dessert. Not constantly, but regularly. She wants to know if you're proud of her, if you would like her drawings, if you think about her on her birthday. I always tell her yes, that wherever you are, you're thinking about her and loving her. I hope that was the right thing to say. Victoria felt tears spilling over. It was the right thing to say, because it was true. I thought about her every day, David, every single day for 7 years. I just convinced myself that thinking wasn't enough, that she was better off without me. And now, David asked, now I want to be part of every day going forward. I want to see her grow up, help her with homework, teach her about the world, be there for everything I missed. David was quiet for a long moment. Victoria, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. The serious tone in his voice made Victoria's stomach clench with dread. What is it? Next month, my lease is up here. The landlord is selling the building, and I can't afford the rent increases in this neighborhood anymore. I've been looking at places further out in Queens, maybe even in New Jersey, somewhere I can afford on my salary, where Lily can still have her own room. The implications hit Victoria like a physical blow. Just as she was finding her way back into Lily's life, they were going to move farther away. The commute from Manhattan would be longer, the distance not just geographical, but symbolic of the different worlds they occupied. How much farther out? Victoria asked carefully. Maybe an hour each way by train. It's not terrible, but it would mean less flexibility for this. For family dinners and school events, and the kind of regular contact that Lily needs if you're going to be a real part of her life. Victoria's mind was already racing through possibilities, calculating solutions with the same strategic thinking she applied to business problems. What if I helped with the rent? What if— No, David said firmly. Victoria, I appreciate the offer, but I won't take charity. I've raised Lily for 7 years on my own. I can continue to provide for her. It's not charity, Victoria protested. She's my daughter too. I should be contributing to her support. You want to contribute to her support? Then be her mother. Show up consistently, be emotionally available, help her with her homework and her problems and her dreams. Money is the easy part, Victoria. The hard part is being present, even when it's inconvenient. His words stung because they were true. Victoria had been thinking about financial solutions because they were comfortable territory for her. Writing a check was simple. Learning to be a parent was terrifying. I want to do both, Victoria said. I want to be present and I want to make sure she has opportunities. David, she's brilliant. I can see it in the way she thinks, the questions she asks, the connections she makes. With the right schools, the right resources. She's already in a good school, David interrupted. She has friends, teachers who know her, a community that cares about her. I won't uproot her life just because you've decided you want to be involved. Victoria felt frustration rising, not at David, but at the situation, at the years of separation that had created these complications, at her own past choices that had led to this moment, where wanting to help felt like interference. Then what do you want from me? She asked, trying to keep her voice level. I want you to figure out how to fit into the life we've already built, David said, not how to rebuild it according to your specifications. Before Victoria could respond, Lily returned from the kitchen carrying a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies and wearing a huge smile. I made these myself, she announced proudly. Daddy helped with the oven parts, but I measured everything and mixed it all up. Victoria took a bite and made appropriately appreciative sounds, but her mind was spinning with David's words. He was right. She couldn't just walk in and start making executive decisions about Lily's life. But she also couldn't ignore the practical realities of their situation, the limitations that David's pride wouldn't let her address directly. As the evening wound down and Victoria prepared to leave, Lily hugged her tightly. Will you come back soon? Lily asked. I'll come back as often as your daddy says it's okay, Victoria replied, looking at David over their daughter's head. It's okay with me if it's every day, Lily said with 7-year-old honesty. I like having a mommy. Walking back to her car, Victoria felt the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. She had found her daughter, but she was about to lose her again to distance and David's stubborn independence. Unless she could find a way to bridge the gap between their worlds without destroying the trust she was just beginning to build. What she didn't know was that in 3 days, Lily would make a discovery that would change everything for all of them. A discovery that would prove that some secrets can't be kept forever, no matter how good the intentions behind them. Victoria was in her office the following Tuesday morning, trying to focus on quarterly reports while her mind kept drifting to dinner conversations and photo albums, when her assistant buzzed her intercom. "Ms. Sterling, there's a David Chen here to see you. He says it's urgent and concerns your family." Victoria's blood ran cold. David had never come to her office before. For him to be here in the middle of a school day, something had to be seriously wrong. "Send him up immediately," she said, already moving toward her private elevator. David emerged from the elevator looking haggard and worried, clutching Lily's yellow backpack in his hands. Victoria's heart stopped. "Where is she? Is she hurt? What happened?" "She's fine," David said quickly. "She's in the lobby with building security. They wouldn't let her up without proper ID. Victoria, we need to talk. Lily found something yesterday and she knows." "Knows what?" David reached into the backpack and pulled out a manila folder that Victoria recognized with growing dread. It was her personal file from 7.5 years ago. Medical records, legal documents, everything related to her pregnancy that she thought had been sealed and buried. "How did she get this?" Victoria whispered. "She was helping me pack boxes for the move. I had it hidden in my closet with other important papers. She was being helpful, organizing everything, and she found it." David's voice was strained with exhaustion and worry. "Victoria, she can read really well for her age. She understood enough to know that you were pregnant with her and that there are documents in here about choices you considered." Victoria sank into her chair, feeling like the world was collapsing around her. The file contained everything: the initial pregnancy test results, the appointment confirmations for consultations she had scheduled but never kept, the correspondence with lawyers about options she had considered before ultimately doing nothing and hoping the situation would resolve itself. "She's been asking questions I don't know how to answer," David continued. "She wants to know why you were scared of her before she was born. She wants to know if you wish she had never existed. She's 7 years old, Victoria, and she's trying to process concepts that most adults struggle with." "Oh, God." Victoria buried her face in her hands. "Where is she now? I need to talk to her." "She's downstairs, but Victoria, she's different. The light in her eyes, the joy she had when she thought she finally had her mother back. It's dimmed. She's trying to be brave, but she's hurt and confused, and she doesn't understand why the woman she was so excited to love was once unsure about wanting her to exist." Victoria felt like she was drowning in regret. "Bring her up, please. I have to explain." "Can you explain?" David asked, his voice gentle but challenging. "Because I've been trying to find the words for 2 days, and I don't know how to make this right for her." 10 minutes later, Lily walked into Victoria's office, and the change in her demeanor was heartbreaking. Gone was the bouncing enthusiasm, the radiant smile, the uninhibited affection. Instead, she looked like a miniature adult, shoulders set with the kind of resignation that no 7-year-old should ever have to carry. "Hi," Lily said quietly, not running to hug Victoria as she had every other time they'd met. "Hi, sweetheart," Victoria replied, kneeling down to Lily's eye level. "Your daddy told me you found some papers that confused you. Do you want to talk about them?" Lily nodded solemnly and climbed into one of Victoria's leather chairs, her small frame dwarfed by the executive furniture. "Were you scared of me before I was born?" she asked with devastating directness. Victoria felt her heart break into pieces. "I wasn't scared of you, Lily. I was scared of me. I was scared that I wouldn't be good enough to be your mother. But you didn't want to keep me at first." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the precision of someone who had read documents she was too young to fully understand, but old enough to grasp their implications. "I was very young and very confused," Victoria said carefully. "I was building my business, and I thought I couldn't do both, be a good mother and run a company. I thought I had to choose, and I was afraid that if I chose you, I would mess up both our lives. So you chose work instead." The simple statement hung in the air like an accusation. Victoria looked at David, who was watching the exchange with the intensity of someone whose heart was breaking for his daughter. "At first, yes," Victoria said, deciding that honesty was the only path forward. "At first, I thought that was the right choice. But Lily, the most important thing you need to understand is that I was wrong. I made the wrong choice, and I've regretted it every single day for 7 years. But if you regretted it, why didn't you come back sooner?" Victoria felt tears starting again. How could she explain 7 years of fear, pride, and misguided noble intentions to a 7-year-old who just wanted to understand why her mother had stayed away? "Because by the time I realized I was wrong, so much time had passed that I convinced myself you were better off without me. I told myself that you had your daddy who loved you perfectly, and that bringing me into your life would just complicate things and maybe hurt you. Were you right about that?" The question came from David, not Lily, and it carried the weight of every conversation they hadn't had, every fear they both carried about whether Victoria's return was helping or hurting their daughter. "No," Victoria said with absolute certainty. "I wasn't right about that either. Lily, you are the most important thing that has ever happened in my life. Meeting you, getting to know you, seeing the incredible person you are. It's made me understand what actually matters. Not money or companies or success, but being part of your life and watching you grow up." Lily was quiet for a long moment, processing with the seriousness of someone much older. "Emma's parents got divorced," she said finally. "Emma says it was really hard at first, but now she has 2 houses and 2 Christmas mornings, and both her parents love her just in different places." Victoria wasn't sure where Lily was going with this observation, but she waited patiently for her daughter to work through her thoughts. "I was thinking," Lily continued, "that maybe it's okay that you weren't ready to be my mother when I was born. Maybe you needed time to become the kind of person who could be a good mommy. And maybe Daddy needed time to learn how to be the best daddy in the world. And maybe I needed time to grow up enough to help you learn how to be my mother now." The wisdom of children, Victoria thought again, could be devastating in its clarity. Lily was offering forgiveness and understanding that Victoria wasn't sure she deserved, but that she was grateful to receive. "Maybe you're right," Victoria said. "Maybe sometimes the best families aren't the ones that start perfectly, but the ones that find each other when they're ready to love each other the right way." "So we're going to be a family now?" Lily asked, and Victoria could hear hope creeping back into her voice. Victoria looked at David, seeking permission to make promises that would affect all their lives. He nodded slightly, and she saw her own determination reflected in his eyes. "We're going to figure out how to be a family," Victoria said. "It might not look like other families, and we'll probably make mistakes while we're learning, but yes, we're going to be a family." Lily smiled then, not the full radiant expression Victoria had come to love, but a tentative, hopeful smile that suggested healing was possible. "Can I ask you something, Mommy? You can ask me anything. When you were scared about being my mother, did you know that I was going to be good at spelling and art and making friends?" "No, sweetheart. I didn't know anything about the amazing person you were going to become." "Well, now you do," Lily said with 7-year-old logic. "So now you don't have to be scared anymore, right?" Victoria laughed through her tears. "Right, now I don't have to be scared anymore." 3 months later, David and Lily moved into a beautiful 3-bedroom apartment 6 blocks from Victoria's penthouse. Victoria had handled the transition carefully, presenting it not as charity, but as a practical solution that served everyone's needs. Lily could stay in her same school. David's commute to work was actually shorter, and Victoria could be part of their daily routine without the logistical challenges of distance. More importantly, Victoria had restructured her entire life around being present for the moments that mattered. She attended every school concert, helped with homework at the kitchen table, and became an expert at bedtime stories, complete with different voices for each character. She learned that being a mother wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up consistently and loving unconditionally. David had accepted a promotion to facilities manager, a position Victoria had created that utilized his engineering background and provided better pay and benefits. Their relationship remained complex. They were learning to be co-parents and friends, building something entirely new from the foundation of what they had once been. And Lily thrived in the security of having two parents who, despite their complicated history, were united in their love for her. She kept her memory box, but added new treasures: ticket stubs from Broadway shows, photos from weekend adventures, and drawings of their unconventional but loving family. On the anniversary of that first dinner in Queens, Victoria stood in their new kitchen, watching David teach Lily how to make pasta sauce from scratch, while telling her stories about his grandmother's recipes. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so far from the sterile success she had once thought was enough, that she felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the second chance she had been given. "Mommy, come help!" Lily called, and Victoria joined them at the stove, letting her daughter guide her hands as they stirred the simmering sauce together. Later that evening, after dinner and homework and the now familiar ritual of bedtime stories, Victoria found herself alone with David on their small balcony, looking out over the city lights that had once represented her entire world. "Do you ever regret it?" David asked quietly. "Giving up the life you had before?" Victoria thought about the question seriously. She had stepped back from day-to-day operations of Sterling Enterprises, though she remained the majority shareholder and attended board meetings when necessary. She had missed several high-profile deals, turned down speaking engagements, and watched her competitors gain ground while she learned to balance parenthood with professional responsibilities. "I regret the time I lost," she said finally. "I regret that I wasn't there for her first word, her first steps, her first day of school. I regret that you had to do everything alone for 7 years, but giving up that old life to have this one, never." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the city settling into evening. Somewhere inside, Lily was sleeping peacefully in her own room, surrounded by drawings and books and the security of knowing that both her parents would be there when she woke up. "She wants to invite Emma for a sleepover next weekend," David said. "That sounds perfect. You know what that means, right? Giggling until midnight, nail painting, probably some crying over boy band members." Victoria laughed. "I can handle giggling 7-year-olds. I've survived hostile takeovers and boardroom coups. How hard can a sleepover be?" "Famous last words," David said with a grin that reminded Victoria of why she had fallen in love with him all those years ago. As they headed back inside, Victoria paused in Lily's doorway, watching her daughter sleep. Lily's face was peaceful, her breathing steady, and scattered around her bed were the books Victoria had been reading to her, adventures about brave princesses and clever animals and children who solved impossible problems through kindness and determination. Tomorrow there would be breakfast to make, school forms to sign, art projects to admire, and 100 other small moments that made up the texture of family life. Victoria had learned that being a mother wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up for the ordinary Tuesday mornings and the skinned knee afternoons and the bedtime conversations about fears and dreams. She had spent 7 years building a corporate empire, but her greatest achievement would always be earning the right to be called Mommy by the extraordinary little girl who had taught her that some things were worth more than all the success in the world. As she turned off the light and headed to her own room, Victoria smiled at the sound of David humming softly while he cleaned up the kitchen, at the sight of Lily's school papers covering the refrigerator, at the beautiful chaos of a life built on love instead of ambition. She had finally learned what it meant to come home.